So admittedly, I have kind of tackled a scenario like this already a couple weeks ago, but I can guarantee you that this video is not going to be a copy and paste of that one. In the past, if you've been keeping up with my channel, you'll know that I recently dealt with a what if where we discussed what could have happened had Jaime Lannister married Lysa Tully, Catelyn's younger sister. The foundation of that question stemming from the information we received from the books of A Song of Ice and Fire. Once upon a time, Tywin Lannister sought a marriage pact with the Tullys of Riverrun, before Robert's rebellion got underway. He wanted his oldest son Jaime to marry Lysa Tully. He even sent him to hang out at Riverrun for a while so him and Lysa could hopefully strike up some kind of connection with each other, but he wasn't that interested in her. Granted, he didn't even know they were going to get married at that point. It was pretty much a done deal for the families, with Hoster and Tywin hashing out the finer details until the tourney of Harrenhal came around, and Aerys derailed that plot by naming Jaime to the kingsguard. If you want more on that timeline though, feel free to check out the video I made on it, if you haven't already. As you can see from the title, we'll be talking about the older of the Tully sisters in this video. It definitely seems like an unlikely pair given that the two clash in canon, but given how things almost went with Lysa, it's actually very possible that if things went a little different, Jaime could have been the man to marry Catelyn Tully, instead of Ned or his big brother Brandon. In the books, Catelyn even thinks that Jaime is attractive. At one point in the books, she even wonders if she's ever seen a man as beautiful or as vile as Jaime Lannister. So, what if, in some cosmic turn of events, Jaime Lannister had been the one to marry Catelyn Tully? How could the story change? As usual, when I tackle these what-ifs, I like to give reasonable explanations that make these certain changes plausible within the story and make sense for the characters. When it comes to the possibility of Jaime getting with Catelyn, a lot of the building blocks are already there, so I don't need to do too much digging. One of the biggest things that helped this scenario out is that Tywin was already pursuing a Lannister-Tully marriage, so the idea of marrying his oldest son to the oldest Tully daughter of the family makes a lot of sense. But there are a couple wrenches that could be thrown into this that we need to sort out. The first one being Brandon Stark. As we know, Rickard Stark, Brandon's father, also pursued a pact with the Tullys. This betrothal happened before Tywin got into talks with Hoster about pairing Jaime up with Lysa. So it occurs to me that the best way to get over Brandon being a potential obstacle is to say that Tywin gets a head start when it comes to a Tully alliance. It's not that big of a stretch to say that Tywin has the mind to start making alliances a bit earlier in this timeline when it comes to his family. After all, he planned for Cersei to get married to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen since she was a little girl, even if things didn't go that well on that front. And why wouldn't he want to get the jump on joining the families in this case? Catelyn is of a similar age to Jaime, the Riverlands are right next to the Westerlands as well. It seems like a great match in all honesty. So Tywin going after a marriage pact a little earlier is not the biggest change. However, something that could cause more of an issue than this, in this case, is Aerys Targaryen. He was the reason that Jaime never married Lysa in canon to begin with. At the tourney of Harrenhal, he named Jaime to the kingsguard, and as a member of such a prestigious order, he's not allowed to take a wife or have children. This was a move by Aerys to spite Tywin by taking away his son and heir. Tywin and the Mad King used to be best friends once upon a time, but things ended up changing. Aerys was obsessed with Tywin's wife Joanna. He was also very jealous of the fact that many people seem to like and respect Tywin as a man and leader more than him. This made him angry, led to him being very paranoid about him, always thinking that he was up to something, out to undermine him and his authority. Giving a white cloak to his son and heir was a way of knocking Tywin down a peg and securing a hostage against him should he try anything. Now, some people may mention that there are more layers to Jaime being named to the kingsguard outside of Aerys. In the books, before the tourney of Harrenhal and Aerys making Jaime swear his oath, Cersei actually convinced him to join the kingsguard. She found out that Tywin wanted to marry her brother off to Lysa, and she didn't like that idea very much. She's very manipulative. So she seduced Jaime and manipulated him into wanting the white cloak and giving up Casterly Rock for her, so they could always be together. She even said that she would make the arrangements for Jaime to get the white cloak as well. Now, it's unclear what Cersei did, if she did anything at all. She was a 15-year-old girl who had pretty little standing at court, in my opinion, even as the daughter of Tywin. I mean, when she was offered as a bride for Prince Rhaegar, Aerys dismissed her as little more than a servant, and therefore unworthy of his son. So what influence she could have on the Mad King to make the decision is beyond me. She just strikes me as very naive when it comes to that, but regardless of what Cersei did or didn't do, I think it's clear that Aerys was just being petty to Tywin here. So if we want Jaime to marry Catelyn, we have to sort out that problem. In my video with Lysa and Jaime, spoilers if you haven't seen that yet, though it's not that big of one if I'm being honest, one of the reasons I used to justify Jaime getting out of the white cloak was to use Aerys' paranoia against him. Aerys was often suspicious that Tywin was up to something nefarious. So if Tywin is that untrustworthy, why name the son of the man he hates to the Order of Knights specifically meant to make him feel safe? In his warped mind, it sounds like a recipe for a disaster to have a lion watching his back. Aerys' suspicion is a viable reason for Jaime not being named to the White Cloak, I would say. But there is another way to go about it as well. As I said, I don't want to do a complete copy and paste of the Lysa video, so I am doing different things here that I also think would have made sense. The reason that Jaime was even able to be named to the Kingsguard in canon is because one of the former members, Harlan Grandison, died. He was an old man and passed away in his sleep. This gave the Kingsguard an opening that needed to be filled, and it was, later on, by Jaime. So it seems to me another way to spare Jaime from the White Cloak is that this guy just doesn't die. Or at least he dies at a later point in the story where it won't become an issue for Jaime. With those changes made, Jaime and Catelyn are free to get betrothed and later on married. I don't think this would be a bad pairing either if I'm being honest, especially since we're disregarding what happened in canon with their families at war and stuff. I don't really see a reason for this not to work out with them. I think Catelyn would be attracted to Jaime too. As I said in the book, she does think he's physically attractive as well. And Jaime, when he was younger, wasn't that bad of a person either. He wasn't as arrogant or cynical as he was in the main timeline. He's handsome, has a sense of honor, and is a very talented fighter for one so young. Catelyn is also very pretty in the books, and she has a pretty strong personality as well, but I don't see that being off-putting for Jaime or anything like that. Now, that being said, Jaime didn't seem too interested in getting married originally, or at least he didn't seem too interested in Lysa when he was sent to Riverrun to foster with them for a bit. Granted, at the time, Jaime didn't know that Tywin was trying to marry him off yet. Though in this timeline, I think the betrothal happens earlier, and Jaime is informed, so this way he'll have some time to get accustomed to life with Catelyn. I don't really see many red flags coming between them outside of Cersei. Jaime did love Cersei and may feel conflicted about getting married because of that, and Cersei won't like the idea of her brother being taken away from her. But outside of that, what comes as a consequence of this pairing in this timeline? Well, there's a lot, I'd say. Let's deal with the Starks first, since they're affected by this pretty heavily. For one, with Catelyn betrothed to and being set up to marry Jaime, Brandon Stark is going to need a new wife. I find that one kind of interesting because there are a couple options he could have for a wife outside of Catelyn. The first that comes to mind is a woman named Barbary Dustin, once known as Barbary Risewell in the books. Brandon wasn't known to be shy around women like his brother Ned, and Barbary was actually his lover at one point, and she wanted to marry Brandon. According to her, Brandon felt the same way and never actually wanted to marry Catelyn. So with her being betrothed to Jaime, this match could have another opportunity to flourish. But even with me saying that, interesting as it may be, I don't see that being the case. Just because Catelyn is with someone else doesn't mean that Brandon's father, Rickard, who is in charge of his betrothals, is just going to give up on a Tully match. I mean, Tywin didn't give up on the Tullys just because Catelyn was with a Stark, so that's a dumb notion. What would happen after the pairing of Jaime and Catelyn is that Brandon gets engaged to a young Lysa Tully instead. Even if she is the second daughter, Rickard is an ambitious man, and Lysa is still the daughter of one of the great houses of Westeros, and the ruling house of the Riverlands. So he's not losing anything on a match like this. So the original pairs, Brandon and Catelyn, Jaime and Lysa, just end up switching around here. Now that being said, this causes another change in the timeline, that specific one revolving around Littlefinger. Even as a boy, he was deeply in love with and obsessed with Catelyn Stark. He thought they were meant to be together, and when the marriage date for her and Brandon was announced, he challenged Brandon Stark to a duel for her hand in marriage. He even asked for Catelyn's favor in battle, which she ended up giving to her soon-to-be husband, Brandon, whom she also had to beg not to kill young Littlefinger. Since she's with Jaime now, it's going to be him that Peter ends up challenging to a fight. Jaime would humor him, and I don't think Catelyn would have to beg Jaime not to kill Peter since he's not as aggressive as Brandon was at this point. But even with that being said, it's not going to be any better for Peter Baelish in this instance. Even though he is around a similar age to Jaime, he's not that good of a fighter, and Jaime is a very talented swordsman. It would be child's play for him. So I see it being a repeat of what happened before. Peter gets beaten down until he can't fight anymore. Jaime even leaves him with a scar like Brandon did in the main timeline. Maybe in this timeline though, instead of getting cut on the chest, Jaime cuts him on the face. Call it a butterfly effect. Different fighters, different scar placements. Now, moving on from that, another change I see happening in this timeline revolves around Tywin Lannister. In the books, Tywin was hand of the king to Aerys Targaryen. He endured a lot of humiliation and ridicule at the hands of the Mad King and other lords because the king allowed it. But after Jaime was named to the Kingsguard, the sight was too much for him to bear, so he resigned his hand. But with Jaime staying as heir to Casterly Rock, Tywin will likely stay as Hand of the King to Aerys. And unfortunately, with his status as Hand prolonged, he'll continue to remain the main target of Aerys' paranoia and suspicion. In canon, there was a lot of tension between Rhaegar and his dad, because Aerys was a cruel man and people seemed to like his son better than him. It only got worse when Tywin left, because as far as the Mad King was concerned at the time, Tywin was his biggest opposition. So maybe if he stays around, tension between Rhaegar and his dad won't be as bad since he'll be more of a distraction for Aerys. The animosity between father and son will still be there though, and something will have to be done about it. But with Tywin still around, he will take the brunt of Aerys' suspicion and his anger. Still, though, with that being said, as Hand of the King, Tywin will be tasked with keeping the peace at court as tensions arise. And with the knowledge that factions are forming between Rhaegar and Aerys, I do think that Tywin would be a Rhaegar supporter. Rhaegar did seem like he was planning to overthrow his father Aerys at some point in the books before he died, and I could see Tywin being on board if that's the case. Aerys isn't exactly his friend anymore, he's losing it every day. He subjects Tywin to endless humiliation at court too, so if he caught wind of Rhaegar planning to take over, he'd be on board since he doesn't owe Aerys anything anymore. Not to mention, he is an opportunist. Rhaegar is much more likely to do him favors for helping him out as opposed to Aerys. Tywin's play in that regard would probably be securing a marriage pact between the families if he can help Rhaegar come into power. He wanted a Targaryen Lannister marriage with Cersei and Rhaegar, but Aerys turned that down. Rhaegar could be different, more open-minded. This time he might push for one of his grandchildren via Jaime and Catelyn to marry one of Rhaegar's children, most likely hoping that his granddaughter could marry Prince Aegon, not Jon, but the son Rhaegar had with Elia. I could easily see that being the foundation for his support if it's possible that his granddaughter could become queen one day. But we are thinking a bit far ahead here. All of that really depends on if they can get rid of Aerys Targaryen. Now, knowing Tywin, he is not above using underhanded tactics to get what he wants. See the Red Wedding for an example. Depending on how involved he is with Rhaegar's coup, I could definitely see him plotting to secretly do away with Aerys behind closed doors. Logically, I could definitely see him gravitating towards the idea of killing Aerys somehow, and as we know, Tywin is not afraid of blood. Though it does beg the question of whether Rhaegar would even want his father to be killed or not. Being a kinslayer is pretty frowned upon in Westeros, even if you have someone else do the dirty work, I would say, and maybe he wouldn't want the suspicion of orchestrating his own father's death to claim the throne hanging over his head. He may just want to imprison Aerys, that way he can rule without bloodshed and set a better example as a ruler by not just killing people to claim power. But regardless of what path they decide to go down, I don't think it's going to go according to plan, because I think Tywin is not going to live long in this timeline. Rhaegar is still going to run off with Lyanna here, and this will kickstart the events that lead to the rebellion. With the disappearance of Lyanna, her father and older brother, Rickard and Brandon, will go to King's Landing and demand her return. Viewing this as an act of treason, the Mad King will decide he wants to kill them. Now faced with the possible deaths of 2 Starks, Tywin will be forced to intervene somehow. Killing 2 Starks is a surefire way to start a war, and if he wasn't pleased about Ned Stark losing his head in OG thrones, he would not be on board with this. He tries to dissuade Aerys from killing the 2 of them, offering lighter punishments, like forbidding them from returning to King's Landing, throwing them in the cells for a while, and maybe even sending Brandon to the wall for threatening Prince Rhaegar. After all, he did say that Prince Rhaegar should come out and die when he arrived in the capital. He threatened the prince's life. That is reason enough to take action. But Aerys won't be that receptive of Tywin's ideas. In fact, it'll just make him angry. Aerys was already on the steady decline, sanity-wise, and Tywin brought out the worst in Aerys when it came to his decisions. He was always giving Tywin the side-eye, expecting that he was up to something. Now, seeing Tywin defending the people he deemed to be traitors would set him off. He views it as an act of crime against the crown, and due to his own paranoia, declares that Tywin is a traitor to the realm as well. So, in a cruel turn of events, Aerys burns Tywin along with Rickard Stark, and Brandon is still strangled to death as well. Cersei would then be taken prisoner by the Mad King Aerys, since during the time that Tywin was Hand of the King, she stayed with him at court. So she'd be held as a hostage that could be used against her brother Jaime, as he would effectively be the Lord of Casterly Rock now. So these deaths also bring about a fairly big change. With the deaths of his father and brother, Ned is now the Lord of Winterfell, but more than that, since Brandon is dead in this timeline, in order to keep up the alliance with the Tullys, he'll take his place in marrying one of Hoster's daughters, like he did in canon. Since Catelyn is now with Jaime in this timeline, that means that Ned is going to get married to a young Lysa Tully, which would make for an interesting pair, if I'm being honest. Ned is a very honorable and respectable man, and he's closer in age to Lysa than Jon Arryn, who is going to need a new wife now in this timeline. I think Lysa would definitely be a bit happier with this match instead, even if she is still in love with Peter. Another change that comes in here is that Jaime would join the rebels to help depose Mad King Aerys. With the death of Tywin and the imprisonment of his sister by the Mad King, I definitely see him wanting justice. This could have some dire consequences later on, though, but we'll get to that in time. Now, with Jaime marrying Catelyn and Ned marrying Lysa, this changes another event. In the books, Ned and Jon Arryn actually got married to the Tully sisters in the same ceremony when the rebellion started. I see the same thing happening here, just with Jaime involved and the partners now switched. Now, there may be a question regarding Jaime and Catelyn. As we know, around this time, Jaime was enamored with Cersei, and she had her claws in him. So something that is up for debate here is if he would actually go through with the bedding ceremony with Catelyn. I could see no definitely being a plausible answer here, but I actually will say he does consummate the marriage with Cat. I don't really see a reason for him not to outside of his loyalty to Cersei. Jaime in his youth was a pretty honorable guy and had pretty big ideas about what honor and duty were. His views only changed after bearing witness to the antics of the Mad King and the Targaryens. I think he sees bedding Catelyn as his duty, and therefore he would have followed through, especially now that he's the Lord of Castle Rock and he needs an heir. And also, I think this could lead into a couple more reasons why I think he'd do it as well. The foundation of each being Tywin. Tywin would have always instilled in Jaime that he has to do his duty, that family comes first, and solidifying the legacy is what matters most. As a Lannister, he has an obligation to do this, and in addition to that, Tywin's death could also push him to do it too. With the grief of losing the only parent he has left, maybe he wants to drown his sorrows away for a while. So maybe he views bedding Catelyn as more of a distraction than anything else in the moment. With that said, this union would likely lead to Catelyn becoming pregnant with Jaime's child, since she did get pregnant with her son Robb on her wedding night with Ned in canon. I would also say that Lysa gets pregnant with Ned's child at this point as well in this alternate timeline. So already we're gearing up for a new and different generation of Starks and Lannisters, bound together by blood. After the weddings, the rebels will then go on to fight the war. With the addition of the Lannisters though, the alliance of rebels is going to need a new name. Thanks to a comment on my Lysa and Jaime video, I know the perfect one too. The Stab Alliance will now become the Blast Alliance, which is pretty epic in my opinion. And with the Baratheons, Lannisters, Aarons, Starks, and Tullys all working together against the Crown, there is no way I see them winning this war. So I think things go about the same as they did in canon up until the sack of the city. Rhaegar will die on the Trident, and the rebels will make their move to claim the throne. One very big question we have to ask ourselves, though, is will Aerys set off the wildfire plot since Jaime isn't around to stop him? The wildfire plot was his plan to blow up the city in case of a rebel victory. Jaime was able to stop this originally because Mad King Aerys kept him as a hostage. He was in the right place at the right time. He was kept close to the Mad King the entire time he was in King's Landing, so he was able to learn about the wildfire plot and then kill Aerys and his pyromancer when he made moves to set it off. Now, with the absence of Jaime, this is subject to change. And to explain how I think this is going to play out in this timeline, I'm going to rewind the clock a bit. Before Rhaegar's death at the Trident, there was a brief moment of time where he actually wasn't in King's Landing. During his absence from the capital, his father dispatched Gerald Hightower to bring his son back. Rhaegar would eventually come back to the capital before leaving for the Trident, but Gerald Hightower did not because he was at the Tower of Joy at this point. In this timeline, I would say that Gerald Hightower actually comes back to King's Landing with Rhaegar instead of remaining at the Tower of Joy. Reason being because Rhaegar wants someone to protect his family while he's away. Sure, old Harlan might be alive at this point, or he could be dead. He is an old man. Gerald is also an older man as well, but he's not an old man. He's not on the verge of death. He's experienced and skilled, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Rhaegar most likely trusts him. So why not put him in charge of his family's safety, since they're being held hostage by Aerys to ensure the loyalty of Dorne? The reason I'm making this change is, once again, because of Jaime. In canon, he wasn't allowed to leave King's Landing because of Aerys and his paranoia, and because of that, Rhaegar entrusted him with the safety of his family. Now with him gone, someone else will have to fill in the role. This time, that's Gerald. Now, Gerald's purpose in this timeline goes beyond keeping Rhaegar's family safe, because in this timeline, I actually don't think they're going to die. Why? Because King's Landing wouldn't be sacked here. The whole reason the sack was even able to happen is because the Lannisters appeared neutral during most of the war. They weren't outright enemies of the crown, which is why Aerys could have been persuaded to open the gates to Tywin when he claimed he wanted to defend the city. That is different now. With Jaime declaring himself an enemy from the start, there is no way Aerys would ever be convinced to open the gates to him if he even thought to try that plan in this timeline. That being said, if there is no sack of King's Landing, then the Mountain never makes its way into the Red Keep to kill Elia and her son, and Amory Lorch won't be able to kill young Rhaenys. So Rhaegar's family gets to live a bit longer. And I would even say the wildfire plot is delayed a bit since the sack of King's Landing expedited Aerys' plan. But it's still going to be an issue, and this is where I'm going to bring in Gerald Hightower. News will eventually reach King's Landing and the Red Keep that the rebels are getting close to the city. Gerald, knowing his duty to Rhaegar, and that is a kingsguard, would know that they need to leave the city. In the books, during the Tower of Joy, when confronted by Ned, who wants his sister back, he says that a kingsguard does not flee. But in a case where certain death is assured for the royal family, he may not have the same mentality here. Now, this is another scenario I kind of tackled in a different video where I discussed what if Jaime had fought at the Tower of Joy and Gerald was the one left behind at King's Landing. I suggest watching that video if you haven't already, since like my Lysa and Jaime video, I'm reaching a different conclusion in this video. What I think happens here is that knowing that death is imminent for the royal family, Gerald goes to the Mad King Aerys and says they need to leave the city before the rebels get there. Or at least he should be able to take Elia and Rhaegar's children and get them to safety before the rebels arrive, because they know what will happen to them should the city be taken. Aerys will refuse this though, and say that the city won't be taken. The only thing the rebels will receive is a pile of ashes. In his madness, Aerys lays bare the plans for the wildfire plot, and tells his pyromancer Rosart that now is the time to set the city ablaze before the rebels get there. Now Gerald is faced with a similar decision to Jaime. How loyal is he to King Aerys? Enough to let him blow up a city and sacrifice the lives of thousands of innocents, including the family of Rhaegar, whom he was tasked by the prince to protect. Gerald was pretty loyal to the Targaryen family in canon, even Aerys, who was burning people alive. But in the end, he seemed to choose Rhaegar over the Mad King when he decided to stay at the Tower of Joy instead of going back to King's Landing. I think the same would apply here. Guided by not only his moral compass, but his loyalty to Rhaegar, he kills Mad King Aerys and his pyromancer before going back to Rhaegar's family and getting them out of the city. It shouldn't be too hard considering they don't have to worry about the city exploding and it's not being sacked, so no risk of being found and caught by soldiers. They most likely make their way to Dragonstone where Queen Rhaella is, along with Prince Viserys. Queen Rhaella will still die giving birth to Daenerys though, and most likely Gerald, with the help of Willem, Dari, and others, will take the kids and end up leaving Dragonstone. Most likely heading down to Dorne since that's where Elia's family is. The rebels will then arrive at King's Landing with its gates wide open. Once they go into the Red Keep, they will find the dead body of the Mad King, but Elia and her children are nowhere to be found. Maester Pycelle and Varys would still be there though, and would fill them in on what happened, how Gerald Hightower killed the king and fled with Rhaegar's family. Jaime will then begin looking for his sister Cersei, and after conversing with Pycelle to find out where she is, he learns something harrowing from him. Cersei is dead. Shortly after Jaime declared himself for the rebels so he could avenge the death of Tywin, Aerys saw his treason and burned Cersei alive, just like their father Tywin, claiming it was punishment for her father and brother's crimes. Tywin, who stood against him when he killed the Starks, and Jaime, who became an active participant in the rebellion meant to depose him. This makes sense for someone like Aerys to do, who's so insanely angry and petty to say the least. He's known for burning people who go against him, like Carlton Chelsted, who tried to stop the wildfire plot. He was Hand of the King and Aerys burned him alive for interfering. Not to mention, it's not the most outlandish idea when we see other characters do it as well. Think about Joffrey and Sansa from the main timeline. Joffrey thought killing Sansa would send Robb a message for his rebellion, but he didn't go through with it because he was supposed to marry Sansa. But even then, it didn't stop him from abusing and torturing her publicly and humiliating her because he thought it was a way to punish her for her brother's crimes. So the idea that Aerys would burn Jaime's sister as some form of retribution for siding with the rebels, I could definitely see. This would mess Jaime up, considering how much he loves Cersei, and he would definitely blame himself in a way for her death. After all, him trying to avenge their father ended up getting her killed. He lost two very important people in his life, and this is going to affect him a lot. I see Jaime entering a depression and becoming more melancholic as a result of this. Robert will still obtain the Iron Throne here, but even with his new position, his reign is still insecure. With Aerys and Rhaegar's children missing, he has a constant threat to the Iron Throne and would be hunting for Gerald Hightower and the remaining Targaryens. I'm sure you would suspect that Dorne is where they are considering the connections between the families. Dorne would definitely hide the fact that they're hiding them though, so there could be conflict here in the future as Robert tries to get them. Maybe for safety's sake, they send Elia and the children to Essos in an effort to hide them better, but Oberyn and Dorne will still be in regular contact with them and making sure that they are safe from Robert. Ned will still make his way to the Tower of Joy in order to retrieve his sister Lyanna. This time around, I would actually say that Jaime goes with Ned to get Lyanna back. I think with the loss of his sister and father, Jaime kinda wants to distract himself from the pain, and to do something productive. I also think that because of failing to save Cersei, this compels him to want to help Ned, since he can relate to having someone he loves taken away from him. Not to mention, they are technically related in this timeline as well, since they both married Tully's sisters. So maybe there's some level of familial obligation here as well. So Ned, Jaime, Howland Reed, and some others go to the Tower of Joy and face off against Sir Arthur Dayne and Oswell Went, since Gerald Hightower is most likely with Elia and the other Martells. The fight goes about the same with them defeating the kingsguard and then finding Lyanna. This would be very interesting because if Jaime is here and Jon is born, then most likely he also knows Jon's secret now, like Howland Reed, who also may know the secret in canon. I don't think Jaime would turn on Ned when this happens. He's not going to suggest that they turn Jon into Robert or anything. This Jaime is likely against killing children, since he was against killing kids in the canon timeline when the rebellion happened. He was horrified when Tywin killed Rhaegar's family because he didn't think he'd go that far. This Jaime I don't think would be any different, especially since he doesn't go through all the same things that OG Jaime does. So keeping that in line with him here, even if he had some level of animosity towards the Targaryens, he wouldn't think that Jon has to die, especially since this is the son of Ned's sister. So now Ned, Howland Reed, and Jaime keep the secrets of Jon Snow. Jaime and Ned would definitely have an interesting relationship in this timeline considering how similar that they would be. Both of them marrying Tullys, both of them losing their fathers and siblings to the Mad King, both of them losing their sisters, albeit under different circumstances. There is a lot they have in common for better or worse now. After the Tower of Joy, Ned goes back home to the north. Like her sister Catelyn did in canon, Lysa will also have given birth to a son for Ned, who will be named Robb, though it won't be the same one that we know and love since he has a different mother now. Jaime will then go back to the Westerlands to his wife Catelyn, who would have also given birth at this point as well. This time though, I would say that she actually ends up having twins instead of one child like she did with Robb. Reason being because Jaime himself is a twin, and in real life twins actually have a higher chance of producing more twins. Which I honestly think is kind of funny considering that Cersei and Jaime are also twins, and they had kids together, but they never had any twins. That may be irrelevant, it's not that big of a deal. We'll just say it's a butterfly effect in this timeline, who cares? I also like the idea that Jaime and Catelyn's children would have a mix of their features, some of them having red hair and some of them having blonde. Kind of like what happened with Catelyn and Ned originally, but in that case, most of Ned's kids look like their mother instead of him. In this timeline, Jaime has two children, a son and a daughter. Jaime's son, who we'll name Tywin, like the Master of Ships from Hot D, has red hair, and his daughter, whom we'll name Cersei, which may be in reference to his sister Cersei, has blonde hair. I feel like Jaime would be a bit detached from fatherhood given how he lost his father and his sister Cersei. He's traumatized from that, but I think things would get a bit better with some help from his little brother Tyrion, who would still be around, and his wife Catelyn. All in all, I think this was a pretty fun scenario to think about, and this is where I'm going to end the video for today. You guys let me know what changes you think would have made sense for this timeline as well in the comments, but for now, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you all next time.